Welcome to your first BA Part 2 English Literature class. In these COVID times, I would first like to hope and pray that all of you are well and your families and your loved ones have been spared from this COVID attack. Let us really pray to God, our Father and Creator, to destroy this virus at the earliest and set us free to live our normal lives. This year in literature we have two papers. Paper 1 is drama. You have 3 plays: Othello by William Shakespeare, She Stoops to Conquer by Oliver Goldsmith, and Arms and the Man by George Bernard Shaw. But I thought that in these difficult times, let's do something, begin with something easy and sweet and gentle, and that is what A Christmas Carol and the novel in your course by Charles Dickens is. Now, fiction is one of the last developed forms of writing in literature. You've done prose and poetry in your BA first year. You will do drama, and right now we are doing fiction. We are going to read a novel by an author who was born in 1812. But fiction began in the 17th century. And before that, England had a long history, like all other countries in the world, of storytelling. And the storytellers would borrow stories from Rome and Greece and France and Europe and their own tales. And it is said that the English had a custom of listening to a story in the evenings, whether it was at the end of a day's battle or at the end of a day's work, the lord of the manor or the chieftain or the king. They would sit round a fire, and men who were called gleemen or scopes or minstrels, they would sing a story about their brave ancestors. And this storytelling was earlier in the form of poems, verse, so that they could be memorized and passed on from one generation to the next. Prose, you have seen, people wrote essays to share ideas, people wrote essays to tell sermons, and prose developed to a great extent from simple to forcible, entertaining, humorous. You read many essays last year. Poems you've seen, poems are the first forms in which people wrote. And drama was on the stage, live, a reenactment of something exciting. It could be dangerous or funny or full of revenge or anger or fights. But fiction was a very elastic and adaptable form of writing. Every writer, beginning from John Bunyan, who wrote the story of being a Christian and the difficulties a Christian faces, the Pilgrim's Progress, the first full-length book form of a story, 1678. Then we have Daniel Defoe. Many of you may have read Robinson Crusoe. He's written many novels. And then you also have, in the same century, you have Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. He's popular for that. He's also a fine prose writer who's written these novels. Then in the 18th century, we have Samuel Richardson. Often he is the one who's called the father of the English novel, and he wrote the first epistolary novel, a letter novel. In fact, he had been spending his young days writing letters for all the maids to the young men they admired, and he took the skill when he was almost 50 years old to write a novel called Pamela. After Samuel Richardson, we have Henry Fielding, who was very famous for the novel Tom Jones, Tobias Smollett, Lawrence Sterne. You find them all on Britannica.com, and you'll find their books on Gutenberg.com. Then in the 18th century, around the middle there were a lot of terror novelists who wrote very frightening stories of skeletons and ghosts and clanking, chains and dark ruins. Horace Walpole, William Beckford, Anne Radcliffe, Matthew Gregory Lewis. Then there was another lady novelist, Frances Burney. She began describing home life, domestic life, as a background for her heroines. So she's the novelist for the domestic scene. Then later down the 18th century, we have Sir Walter Scott. He's a very famous novelist. He's written about 30 plus novels, all describing his homeland, Scotland. And they are called historical novels because his novels are full of battles and kings and local upheavals and revenge and revolt and all the details of historical details of his times to make the people of England admire the Scots for their courage and bravery and loyalty. Jane Austen is another 18th century novelist who is famous only for 6 novels. She's written only 6 novels, but they're such perfect sketches of human character and human situations, so perfectly reflecting the times that they have been written in. You have Pride and Prejudice in your course, and when the time comes, we'll learn more about Jane Austen. Like Sir Walter Scott, we have a writer, Maria Edgeworth. She described Ireland. One of her famous novels is Castle Rackrent, gives a very vivid picture of Irish life. And she's one of the first novelists to write stories targeted for children, especially for children. Then there are many other writers in the 19th century, John Galt, William Harrison. Then there is George P.R. James, who's written 189 volumes of writing. Then Frederick Marryat, Thomas Love Peacock. All of them are interesting and entertaining. And for those of you who love reading, you're welcome to go to gutenberg.com or pagebybpage.com. There are many sites where you can download free books and classics and you can read them. Then we come to our Charles Dickens. He was born on the 7th of February, 1812, almost just 200 years ago. And he had a long name, Charles John Huffam Dickens. And he's been called one of the greatest novelists of the Victorian times because of his compassionate and creative and very vivid description of the lives of the poor and the unfortunate. His father was a clerk in the Navy, but was debt prone. He always started borrowing money, and when he borrowed too much, he'd come to London, and when he borrowed too much, he was put in prison. He and his family, his wife and children, and only this 11-year-old child was left out to start work. And he went to work at Warren's blacking warehouse at 6 shillings a week. 20 shillings make a pound. So 6 fours are 24. In the whole 1 month, he would just about earn a pound. About 8 to 10 hours of blacking, and all the loaves and the vulgar ruffians who were his companions would trouble him. But those painful experiences, they wrote themselves on his heart. And when he was writing, he could give pictures of sorrow and trouble and difficulties experienced by his young protagonists very well. Then his grandmother died, leaving about 450 pounds for the family, and so Dickens' father was set free from prison, and the boy went back to school. And Charles went to school. Unfortunately, his principal was a tyrant, very fond of beating the boys. So he didn't learn much, except that he learned to love stories. And he loved to act. In fact, he even thought he should become an actor. But when he was 15, to help the family, he joined a company at an attorney's office, Ellis and Blackmore Charles. And there He was working in the office by day and learning shorthand at night, and he hoped that he would soon become a reporter for the court. When he was a very good writer, he was appointed Parliament and newspaper reporter, and now he was sent to different parts of England by road, on horseback, or by coach and chariot, and he saw England at its, grass realities or the ground realities of the common man, the tavern, the stables, the country folk, the farmers, and he gained an infinite experience about the life of the ordinary Englishman. He then began putting this experience to work, and he began writing some short stories under the pen name of Boz, B-O-Z. So this first book came out. It's called Sketches by Boz. It was quite popular. So different historians record his first story as Mr. Minns and his cousin, or A Dinner at Poplar Walk, but these stories were published by a London periodical, Monthly Magazine. Now when this book, Sketches by Boz, was published in 1836, Charles Dickens became popular, and Chapman and Hill, publishers, they asked him that we have an illustrator who's going to make sketches. Can you write something for us? Charles agreed. Unfortunately, that illustrator, Robert Save, has committed suicide after 2 sets of installments of pictures, and so Charles Dickens was able to call in a friend, Harblet Knight Brown, to provide illustrations. And this time, since it was Charles who was calling the shots, between the two they made something, adventures of young men, in a garden, in a zoo, at a rich man's home, all crazy adventures, called the Pickwick Papers. And it was so entertaining that they took London by storm, and Charles Dickens became instantly popular. In November 1836, he was given charge of Bentley's Miscellany, he was editor of the magazine, and it was here he serially published his first novel, Oliver Twist. It's a 400-page novel in which the hero of the story is a young orphan boy. It has been prescribed in schools, and people have been reading them for the last 200 years because of the vivid details and pain and suffering and struggle of an innocent child who doesn't want to become wicked but who is being forced by society to become a thief. It was in the BA Part 2 course up to last year. Then from then on, Dickens kept on writing. He wrote many novels, almost one every year, targeting social abuses and advocating reform. In 1842, he went to England for 5 months, came back and wrote a book. When he came back, he visited 2 places that deeply touched him. One was a factory at Manchester, where he was shocked at the terrible condition of the workers. And the second was the Field Lane Ragged School. Ragged as R-A-G-G-E-D. And when you look it up, you find that there were schools that were called ragged because the children came in rags. He was so hurt, so disturbed that humans could allow such a terrible situation to continue, that he was determined to write something that would shock the people into sympathy, make them open their purse strings and be kind. And for that he chose the Christmas season, and he wrote this book that we are going to study. And in fact, he spent many hours at night walking through the streets of London to absorb the grim atmosphere and try to bring joy to it. And that is what our novel is all about. So we'll start looking at the novel. And before we read the novel, Fortunately, it's the shortest novel in your course. I'd just like you to take out a notebook and note down the characters so that when we hear about them, the novel has 5 chapters. I'm going to do a chapter a turn, or as much time as I have. You may not want to keep sitting here indefinitely. So I'll break up my discussion of the novel into 3 or 4 parts. But I would definitely like you today to write down the character. So take out your notebooks and write this heading like Christmas Carol, 1843, and by Charles Dickens. Okay. So when you look at the characters in the novel, I haven't written them in the way that they have come, but I've just at random put them in groups. The first is Ebenezer Scrooge, Ebenezer. Ebenezer Scrooge, SC, capital SC, ROOGE. He was what in Hindi we call a Maha Kanjus, extremely miserly. He gave his clerk 1 coal to burn on a cold wintry night as a warm fire. Very, very, very miserly. Didn't want to spend 1 penny out of his pocket for anybody. And then you have the story, the ghost story, very interesting ghost story. 4 ghosts in a novel. So number 1, Ebenezer Scrooge, Ebenezer, and then number 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 ghosts. The first who comes is the ghost of Jacob Marley, Jacob Marley. Dash, you can write partner or dead partner of Scrooge. Scrooge and Marley were partners in business. Marley has died 7 years ago when the story begins. So Jacob Marley's ghost comes. Then ghost number 1, the second ghost is ghost of Christmas past. Then the third ghost is ghost of Christmas present. CHRISTMAS. And then the fourth ghost is, or the fifth ghost is, the fourth ghost is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. So you have these 5 characters, Ebenezer and the 4 ghosts. Then you have Fan, sister of Ebenezer. Underneath Fan you can write Fred, Fred, son of Fan. Then near Fred you can write Fred's wife, comma, Fred's wife's sister. We meet them at a party. So Fred's wife and Fred's wife's sister. Then you have the Cratchits. It's a family. Bob Cratchit, B-O-B Bob Cratchit, C-R-A-T-C-H-I-T. Bob Cratchit is the clerk who works for Ebenezer. Then under him you write Mrs. Cratchit. Then you can write Peter Cratchit, eldest son. Then Martha, M-A-R-T-H-A, Martha Cratchit, eldest daughter. Then Belinda Cratchit, the second daughter. Then Tim Cratchit, their youngest son. Plus 2 smaller Cratchits. There are 1 boy and 1 girl who have not been given names in the novel. So Bob has 2 sons, 2 daughters that are named, and 1 son and 1 daughter that are not named. Then we have Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig, F-E-Z-Z-I-W-I-G. So a merchant and his wife who are Scrooge's first employers. Then you have Belle, B-E-L-L-E, a pretty girl. a pretty poor girl whom Ebenezer had loved. So, a girl whom Scrooge had loved, then now a happily married lady because she loved him, and even he was a poor man, but as he got richer and became greedier, she didn't want to continue to live with him, and she to hold on to a promise to love him, and so she left. So that's Belle. Then another person from Ebenezer's past is Dick Wilkins, D-I-C-K, Dick Wilkins, W-I-L-K-I-N-S. He was an apprentice with him. So when they were learning work at their first employer, Mr. Fezziwig, then Dick and Ebenezer worked together. Then you have two servants. Number one, Mrs. Dilber, D-I-L-B-E-R, a laundress, a washerwoman. And the next one is they've just given her character, the charwoman. What in Hindi we say Mehri, we call a servant Mehri. So the cleaning woman would be called in English a charwoman. So the charwoman. And then there was Joe, a pawn shop owner. He would accept stolen goods or old goods and pay in return. There are a few other characters that are not named. There's one boy called Topper, T-O-P-P-E-R, he's a bachelor, at the party at Fred's place. So, I'm sure many of you attended my class and kept on hearing me telling you to buy these books and read them. I've read them, A Christmas Carol and the other two novels, Pride and Prejudice and Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. But if you haven't, as I was looking up the net, I found that there's quite a few sites where you can find free classics to download. One is Gutenberg.org, then there's pagebypagebook.com, then there's manybooks.net, I think there's a site Anybooks also, then there's freeebooks.net. So if you go looking, Charles Dickens classic written 1843, now it's more than 150 years old, so it's free from copyright and it's comfortably available on the net. So I'm hoping that if you haven't read the novel, you will definitely start reading it so that I can do chapter 1 on my next term. So happy reading. Life will go on. This is just an interval that we have to think more deeply about ourselves, to be more careful, to learn to live with less. But life will go on. Just like the plague finished, wars were over, so the tsunami came and went, storms and cyclones come and go, coronavirus will also leave our shores. But I'm just happy to see all of you. I'm hoping that you will enjoy this novel when you read it. It'll set you on the trail of writing a novel yourself, because the ghost teaches such valuable lessons to Scrooge, and if we know anyone who needs a lesson and we can send a ghost to teach him that lesson, a lot of stories are hidden in this novel for us. So all the best and see you next time.